Welcome to The Roommate Coach. My name is Mark Lynn. This is KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. This will be episode 6 of The Roommate Coach, which I am calling Don't Kick the Dog. I will explain shortly how I came up with a bit of an oddball title. And also later on, I will address a question or comment feedback I got from a listener. And I really do appreciate the feedback, and I will do my best to answer the issue the person raised. And I also have some ideas for dealing with feedback on an ongoing basis, which I'll explain in a little while toward the end of the show. And speaking of feedback, if you'd like to leave me any feedback or have any questions or comments, you can do so at theroommatecoach.com. There is a contact link on the homepage, or you could call local to Humboldt County, area 707-362-8000. 707-362-8000. That's a 24/7 voicemail line, and leave me any questions or comments you like, and I will do my best to address them, as I said, here on the show. And also I've got some plans in the works for dealing with feedback on an ongoing basis as well. So how did I come up with the title for this episode of Don't Kick the Dog? Well, the answer to that goes back to a cartoon that I first saw many years ago. I think I originally saw it in the New Yorker, and some of you may know the New Yorker magazine has, for many, many years now, had a wonderful, I'm not sure what the word would be, but they have some very interesting cartoons. In fact, they even put out a huge coffee table book a while back that I think it was something like 30 years of New Yorker cartoons. I picked one of those up, haven't really had a chance to do it justice. But this particular cartoon was one in several panels, and the first panel showed a man at work being chewed out by his boss. It was all silent. There wasn't any caption, but you could tell by the body language that the boss was giving this poor guy a bad time for whatever reason. It wasn't really explained. So in the next panel, you see the guy at home, and he's yelling at his wife, and not quite sure what he's saying or anything, but it's once again made clear by the body language that he's just giving her a bad time. And the panel after that shows the mother, the woman who just got yelled at by her husband. She's giving her son, I guess like a 10-year-old or so boy, giving him a bad time, just yelling at him about something. And then the panel after that, I'm going from memory here, so I may not have my panels exactly right, so bear with me. But I think he turned around and passed the bad time and the yelling and whatever on to his younger sister. And in the very last panel, whoever was the final recipient of the bad time, I guess you'd say, goes out to the yard and kicks the dog. So it's pretty obvious that the initial frustration and resentment or whatever that the man got in the first place by being chewed out by his boss has gradually worked its way downstream, kind of as the old saying goes, to the poor dog, who really presumably didn't do much of anything but just be there, but wrong place, wrong time, and the dog caught hell because the sister had caught hell, and she caught hell because of the brother, and so on and so forth, all the way up to, and you could even probably work it backward from there. Chances are that the boss had gotten some kind of a chewing out from his boss, and maybe the stockholder at the stockholder meeting, who knows. So it floats downstream. Now, obviously, in order for my show, for the Roommate Coach, to remain logically consistent, this has to have something to do with roommates. And sure enough, I am pretty sure that it does. I am convinced that a lot of the trouble that roommates give each other is kind of a downstream thing where there's something else in their life, and who knows where it comes from. I'm not here to point fingers at in any particular direction, but it is just a reality that much of the time the interactions we have, some good, some not so good, are with those that are close to us. But be that as it may, it's quite possible that a lot of roommate troubles got started by some kind of unpleasantness happening in one or the other, sometimes in both roommates' lives, but not with each other. So just like the poor dog in the cartoon gets kicked not because of anything the dog did, but because of the frustration and resentment that in the cartoon the sister was feeling, sometimes a roommate might have some trouble from their roommate, not because of anything the first roommate did, but just because of something in the other roommate's life that they're frustrated about. All right, so this might be accurate enough that lots of times people do things, inconsiderate things, etc., to each other just because they're frustrated or irritated about something else in their life. Well, that's all well and good, but what do we do with the information? But before I even attempt to answer that question, I want to repeat something once again, kind of a disclaimer that no, I am not making excuses for anyone. Not at all, emphatically not. I am adamant that we are all responsible for what we do, and if someone had a bad time in the past, that doesn't by any means give them any right to give someone else a bad time in the present. And I don't know of any way to make it any clearer than that this is not meant as an excuse. What it is meant is as an explanation. And the interesting thing, or the good thing about understanding that someone else's behavior doesn't really have anything to do, at least not at first, with you, is that it makes it less likely that you will take it personally. Now, I have to qualify that also, because obviously if someone's doing something that's really making your life unpleasant or worse, in one way of looking at it, it's impossible not to take it personally because you're the one suffering. I mean, I get that. But the way I'm using the phrase here is it's not because of you happening to be you. It's kind of like when you get cut off in traffic by some inconsiderate or reckless or incompetent, for that matter, for some kind of whatever reason the driver has. They know nothing about you. It's not like they were lying in wait for your particular car and said, aha, there he is, I'll get him. No, it's not like that. It's the same thing with roommates. So taking things personally and responding to them as if they were intended for you as an individual is a real good way to get off to a bad start. And the trouble is that much of the time what happens is something that started out as a problem in the past having nothing to do with the present becomes a problem in the present. So that's a real good thing to avoid. There is another reason why this kind of a understanding of the causes of some kinds of roommate problems can really be helpful, especially if you're willing to be objective and maybe somewhat brutally honest with yourself, is that most of the time I think we find that there are two sides to every story, that very seldom in a situation with conflict is one person a complete saint and the other person is the complete sinner. It's usually somewhat of a mixture, even if both parties might like to resist knowing that fact. If you're willing then to maybe even take a look at some of your own behavior and consider whether some past frustrations or anything in your life that maybe has bothered you in the past, if that has anything to do with the present, there can be a couple of surprisingly large advantages to doing this type thing, even if it is a bit uncomfortable at first. And I will explain those here in just a minute after a brief, I guess I'm calling this a station break. You're listening to The Roommate Coach. This is episode 6. I'm calling it Don't Kick the Dog. And this is KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been put on the air by Access Humboldt, which is located on the web at accesshumboldt.net. My name is Mark Lynn, and you can leave any feedback or questions or comments for me at area 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000, or on the web at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the home page. We're talking about not kicking the dog, and how acknowledging some of our own perhaps past experiences of being the dog and being kind of resentful because of that can leave us in a state of mind where we're more likely to have some kind of conflict with our roommates and vice versa. Where I left off before the break was talking about the advantage of, once again, going first, if at all possible, and looking into some of your own experiences just to see if any of this type thing, this obsolete response type thing, is affecting some of your own behavior. And one big advantage of that, almost always by going first, even if you don't necessarily talk about it specifically, and it's probably not a good idea to go overboard making a big deal about this kind of thing. It's more a matter of your behavior. But if it kind of shows by your attitude that you're open to the possibility that maybe you are a little touchy because of some things that have happened to you, well, that fact of doing it that way generally makes it more likely that the other person or other persons will at some point consider the same thing. I mean, it's all reality based. I mean, whatever has happened in our past has happened. There's nothing we can do to change it. And if some of that is affecting our present ways of dealing with each other, and when you think about it, it seems kind of hard to imagine how it wouldn't. I mean, we are the sum total of everything that we've ever been through, good or bad. So that's the big advantage right there, is just kind of making it an okay thing to do by going first. It takes a little courage, maybe, or a little guts, but what's wrong with that? The other thing I really like about this approach is it combines a couple of other things that I think we've already discussed that are really important in keeping any relationship as good and healthy as possible. One is remaining in the present, which, by being as clear as possible about old effects on everyone's behavior, yours and everyone else's, by being as clear as possible that those things happened a long time ago and they don't have anything to do with now and with you and your roommates, it's a lot less likely that the past and the present will get kind of mixed up. So that way you keep the past in the past, and then the present hopefully stays a little bit more trouble-free. Okay, so I'm thinking maybe a quick example of what I'm talking about, because this all sounds kind of abstract when I play it back. Maybe one of your roommates has a history. Maybe he was maybe in school. He went to school where they really, really picked on the kids if they did anything wrong or made any mistakes. Some kinds of schooling, some schools are known for exceptionally being really harsh on the kids, on the students, in terms of criticism. And as a result, some people grow up with a real, very thin-skinned, with a very low tolerance for criticism of any kind, even when it's justified. This is pretty well known. And the obvious problem there is if something happens in the present that does need to be discussed, maybe somebody's doing something that is bothering someone else, it's almost impossible to talk about that kind of a thing without it being perceived as at least mildly critical, which is fine. There's really, objectively, there's nothing wrong with objective, constructive criticism. But if someone is especially touchy about it because of past experiences, then it's relatively easy for a non-issue to seemingly turn into a real issue if it's not understood. So this is why some understanding on everyone's part can help. This is what I mean by keeping the past in the past and, as much as possible, minimizing its effects on the present. Another nice saying that I got from Nathaniel Branden years ago is that unhappiness in the past plus unhappiness in the present does not equal less unhappiness. That would be bad math. The solution to unhappiness in the past is happiness and peace and harmony in the present. I think I said there were a couple more advantages to doing things this way, to being realistic and acknowledging some of the past experiences, some of the times of maybe when we were the dog and we got kicked, at least metaphorically speaking, unfairly. And if that's the case for maybe both you and your roommate to some extent, and there's a good chance that it is statistically, since a lot of people have had some, we've all been misused by the world to some extent or another. The real difference is what we do about it. So the nice thing about acknowledging this type thing is that it makes it more likely that you and your roommate will stay on the same side. As I keep saying, we're all in this together. Now, maybe that's not true for the entire planet, although I think we'd be better off if it was, but that's a different conversation. But if you're sharing housing and expenses and work and everything else with someone else, then you are in it together. And whatever you can do to keep that as the predominant attitude, as opposed to some kind of a battle, which is unfortunately what happens so much of the time, then you're a lot likely to be better off, both of you, all of you. All right, so that's about it for this particular topic. I guess to summarize it rather briefly, I would revise my title a little bit. I'd say the best idea, the best advice is don't kick the dog, but also don't be the dog. Don't do any kicking and don't let yourself be kicked around. And that's, I think, a pretty good prescription for fair treatment. And I mentioned earlier at the beginning that I wanted to address some feedback I got from a listener, and I do appreciate that. This is KZZH is a fairly new station, and as of right now, I don't even have a regular schedule. So whoever listens and whoever takes the time to call in and let me know that somebody out there is listening, I really appreciate that. So thank you again for the feedback. And I think I'll start with what I have in mind. I'm going to, on the roommatecoach.com, as soon as I can, I'm going to set up some things on there to make it possible to have some ongoing dialogue. I've already got a forum on my website. I don't have it connected to or connected in any way to the show topics. So I think I'll change that. Now, it might take a little while. So in the meantime, I'll just do what I'm doing here, which is just responding verbally. But just to let everyone know, I do intend to make the response. I'd like it to be a two-way conversation. I mean, I have my ideas as to how roommates can get along better, and everybody out there has their own experiences, and some may agree with some of what I have to say and disagree with other things. No one's got all the answers. I sure as heck don't. So, but on to the feedback I got, and this is a good example of where the forum would be nice, because I'm not entirely sure I understood the whole comment. It was just on voicemail. It was just kind of a brief voicemail, and I didn't catch the gentleman's name, so I apologize for that. But it seemed to be kind of a criticism that I wasn't referring to specific case studies or the, and again, I may be off base here, and I welcome being corrected, but the fellow was referring to apparently some things I have said that I do refer to psychological insights and ideas and things, because I think a lot of what goes on between people is psychologically based. I mean, that's not any great revelation. I mean, we are psychological beings. But because of that, this gentleman seemed to want me to be posting some case studies, or maybe some more formal evidence to back up something I had said. I'm kind of guessing there because it was a very brief comment. And I appreciate the feedback, and I'm not quite sure what to do about it, but I'll address it a little bit as best I can here. And yeah, I do believe that our understanding our psychology is helpful, if not essential, in helping us get along with each other. Unfortunately, and here's where I think it gets a little tricky, unfortunately, I think a lot of psychology and psychiatry in our world, in our culture, has been kind of co-opted, and a lot of people, a lot of young people especially, but people in general, a lot of people are very skeptical of any mental health services, and I suspect if I was to start posting a lot of mental health related responses or findings, that I'd be met with some skepticism. Well, I'm skeptical of much of mainstream psychology and psychiatry as well. So for that reason, it's kind of difficult for me to come up with a lot of specific, right offhand, I don't know of any specific studies going into the exact topics I'm talking about here. I do have something I can refer to briefly. I'll quote here, and then I'll put some links on my website that kind of summarize what I'm saying about the whole mental health profession. And one of my core premises here is that much of the trouble we have in getting along with each other is based on the way our society is structured, that we become more suspicious and less trusting and more likely to have conflicts with each other because of our society. Now, that has been, and in years gone by, that has been more of an understood or accepted concept within the mental health community. I'll quote from Erich Fromm, a psychoanalyst who wrote the book called The Sane Society in 1955. He writes, quote, "Yet many psychiatrists and psychologists refuse to entertain the idea that society as a whole may be lacking in sanity. They hold that the problem of mental health in a society is only that of the number of," and he quotes, "unadjusted," unquote, individuals, and not of a possible unadjustment of the culture itself, end quote. Now, the psychologist I'll identify shortly who quotes him goes on to ask, is American society a healthy one, and are those having difficulties adjusting to it mentally ill? Or is American society an unhealthy one, and are many Americans with emotional difficulties simply alienated rather than ill? Then he goes back and quotes some more from Fromm, the same book. Begin quote, "An unhealthy society is one which creates mutual hostility and distrust, which transforms man into an instrument of use and exploitation for others, which deprives him of a sense of self, except inasmuch as he submits to others or becomes an automaton," end quote. And this is now back to the person quoting him. He says, Fromm viewed American society as an increasingly unhealthy one in which people routinely experience painful alienation that fuels emotional and behavioral difficulties. Now, I actually found this quote based on, or by reading an article by another psychologist, a contemporary psychologist by the name of Bruce Levine, PhD, and I will post a link to his page. And I've got a couple paragraphs here that I'll quote that very briefly explain why I need to go back to the 1950s for a quote explaining what I'm talking about. Bruce Levine, among other things, writes about how the culture and how the attitudes within the mental health community, for example, have changed over the decades. And I'll quote here, quoting Bruce Levine. In the 1970s, prior to the domination of the biopsychiatry Big Pharma partnership, many mental health professionals took seriously the impact of coercion and resentful relationships on mental health. And in a cultural climate more favorable than our current one for critical reflection of society, authors such as Erich Fromm, who addressed the relationship between society and mental health, were taken seriously even within popular culture. But then psychiatry went to bed with Big Pharma and its big money. Their partnership has helped bury the common sense reality that an extremely coercive society creates enormous fear and resentment, which results in miserable marriages, unhappy families, and severe emotional and behavioral problems. End quote. I will post a link to a couple of different articles by Bruce Levine, including the one in which he quotes Erich Fromm. I'll post that on my website. This is an enormous topic in its own right, the whole question about mental health services and how that might or might not relate to the difficulties roommates have with each other. Ultimately, I think it's a human problem, and very briefly, the problem I have and quite a few others have with traditional mental health services is much of the time the attempt is made to turn it into a chemical or a biological or genetic issue, whereas more and more people, myself included, are becoming convinced that a lot of these issues are just simply human issues and reactions to things that have happened and problems in the past, and why make mountains out of molehills. But we'll go into more detail on that. And as I've said, I intend to, as soon as I can, I intend to modify the roommatecoach.com to make it possible to have ongoing dialogues about this or anything else for that matter. I'd like this whole thing to be, as they say online, a conversation rather than just a one-way talk. So I think that's about it for today for the Don't Kick the Dog episode 6. And this has been the Roommate Coach, episode 6, Don't Kick the Dog. My name's Mark Lynn, and this has been brought to you on a wonderful new FM radio station here in Eureka, California, KZZH 96.7 FM. Brought to the air by Access Humboldt, accesshumboldt.net. If you want to leave me any comments or feedback or criticism or complaints or compliments or anything, you can leave that at my website, theroommatecoach.com. There's a contact link on the home page. Or you could leave a voicemail at a 24/7 voicemail system at area 707-362-8000. And that's it for today. Thanks again for listening, and I'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.